In the heart of Springfield Central Hospital, an unexpected bond forms between Nurse Jenna and Dr. Harris, a renowned pediatrician, as they care for Mia, a 7-year-old battling leukemia. As the doctor grapples with the pain of losing his own daughter, Jenna finds herself drawn into a web of mystery surrounding his nightly visits to Mia's room. Their journey of emotional healing through friendship takes an unforeseen turn, leading to shocking revelations that will change everything they thought they knew about each other and the hospital itself. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. The night shift at Springfield Central Hospital was always quieter, but for Nurse Jenna, it was anything but peaceful. As she made her rounds, a familiar figure caught her attention. Dr. Harris, the hospital's esteemed pediatrician, was leaving Mia's room again. It wasn't the first time Jenna had noticed this, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Dr. Harris's face bore a distant, sorrowful expression as he quietly closed the door behind him. Jenna couldn't help but wonder what was going on. It was unusual for a doctor, even one as dedicated as Dr. Harris, to spend so much time with a single patient, especially during the night hours. The next morning, Jenna found herself in the break room, unable to shake off her concerns. As she poured herself a much-needed cup of coffee, her colleague, Nurse Sarah, entered. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Sarah remarked, noticing Jenna's troubled expression. Jenna hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's Dr. Harris," she began, lowering her voice. "I've noticed him visiting Mia's room late at night. It's been happening quite frequently." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That is odd. I mean, we all know he's dedicated, but that's pushing it, isn't it?" Jenna nodded, glad she wasn't the only one who found it strange. "Exactly. I can't help but feel there's more to it. It's not just unprofessional, it's, I don't know, unsettling somehow." As they discussed the situation, Jenna couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. She'd always respected Dr. Harris, admired his skill and compassion. But this behavior was out of character, even for him. Later that day, Jenna returned to Mia's room for her regular checkup. As she entered, she was struck by a noticeable change in the young girl's demeanor. Mia, who had been withdrawn and sullen for days, now seemed more relaxed, even content. "Hey there, Mia," Jenna greeted, approaching the bed. "You're looking cheerful today. Did something good happen?" Mia looked up from the book she was reading, a small smile playing on her lips. "Dr. Harris told me a funny story last night," she said, her eyes brightening. "He makes me forget about being sick sometimes." Jenna felt a mix of emotions wash over her. On one hand, she was relieved to see Mia in better spirits. The girl's battle with leukemia had been tough, and any improvement in her mood was welcome. On the other hand, Jenna couldn't ignore the irregularity of these nightly visits. As she checked Mia's vitals and administered her medication, Jenna's mind raced. What exactly was Dr. Harris doing during these visits? Was he simply going above and beyond to comfort a sick child, or was there something more sinister at play? The change in Mia was undeniable. Her appetite had improved, and she seemed more engaged with her surroundings. It was as if a weight had been lifted off her small shoulders. But at what cost? And what were the implications for Dr. Harris's professional conduct? Jenna finished her tasks and bid Mia goodbye, promising to return later. As she left the room, she couldn't shake off the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something much bigger than she realized. The mystery of Dr. Harris's nightly visits had taken root in her mind, and she knew she couldn't let it go. With each step down the hospital corridor, Jenna's determination grew. She needed to get to the bottom of this, for Mia's sake, for the integrity of the hospital, and for her own peace of mind. Little did she know that her investigation would lead her down a path that would challenge everything she thought she knew about healing ethics, and the power of human connection. Jenna's curiosity got the better of her. One night, she decided to stay late, positioning herself strategically near Mia's room. As the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythm, she saw Dr. Harris approach, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet corridor. Heart pounding, Jenna crept closer to Mia's door, left slightly ajar. What she witnessed next left her stunned. Dr. Harris, usually so composed and professional, was sitting at Mia's bedside, his voice animated as he wove tales of magical lands and brave heroes. Mia's laughter, a sound rarely heard in the pediatric oncology ward, filled the air. And then, Dr. Harris said, his hands gesturing wildly, the dragon sneezed, and all the stars in the sky scattered like fireflies. Mia giggled, her eyes bright with wonder. What happened next, Dr. Harris? Jenna watched, transfixed. The scene before her was touching, almost heartwarming. Dr. Harris's storytelling seemed to transport Mia far away from the sterile hospital room, beyond the reach of her illness. For a moment, she was just a child, lost in the magic of a good story. Yet as Jenna quietly retreated, conflicting emotions churned within her. The ethical implications of Dr. Harris's actions weighed heavily on her mind. While his intentions seemed pure, his behavior crossed professional boundaries. What if other staff members found out? What if the hospital administration got wind of these nightly visits? The next day, Jenna found herself distracted during her shifts. She couldn't shake the image of Dr. Harris and Mia, nor could she ignore the potential consequences of his actions. As she changed an IV bag, her colleague, Nurse Mark, noticed her preoccupation. "Everything okay, Jenna?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Jenna hesitated before responding. "Mark, have you ever bent the rules for a patient, even if you thought it was for their own good?" Mark raised an eyebrow. "That's a loaded question. What's this about?" Jenna sighed, realizing she needed to tread carefully. "I'm just wondering about the line between compassion and professionalism. Where do we draw it?" As they discussed the hypothetical scenario, Jenna's resolve strengthened. She needed to know more about Dr. Harris, to understand what drove him to take such risks for Mia. Was there something in his past that explained his behavior? Determined to uncover the truth, Jenna began her investigation in earnest. During her breaks, she pored over old hospital records, searching for any clues about Dr. Harris's history. She casually questioned longtime staff members, piecing together fragments of information. "Dr. Harris? Oh, he's been here forever," one elderly nurse told her. "Brilliant doctor, but there was some tragedy in his past, I think. Never talks about it, though." Another colleague mentioned offhandedly, "I remember when he took a long leave of absence a few years back. Never knew why, but he came back. Different, more driven somehow." Each snippet of information only deepened the mystery. Jenna felt like she was assembling a jigsaw puzzle, without knowing what the final picture looked like. She knew she was treading on thin ice, potentially jeopardizing her own career by digging into a superior's past. But the image of Mia's smiling face, so rare and precious, spurred her on. As days passed, Jenna's investigation consumed her thoughts. She found herself watching Dr. Harris more closely during rounds, noting the gentle way he spoke to his young patients, the shadows that sometimes crossed his face when he thought no one was looking. One night, as she was leaving the hospital after a long shift, Jenna spotted Dr. Harris in the parking lot. He was sitting in his car, head bowed, shoulders shaking slightly. Was he crying? The sight struck her like a physical blow. Whatever was driving Dr. Harris's actions, it was clear that it came from a place of deep, personal pain. Jenna realized that her quest for answers had led her to a crossroads. She could report her suspicions and observations, potentially putting an end to whatever solace Dr. Harris was providing Mia. Or she could dig deeper, risking her own career in the process, to uncover the full story behind these mysterious nightly visits. As she drove home that night, Jenna knew that her decision would have far-reaching consequences, not just for herself, but for Dr. Harris, Mia, and perhaps the entire hospital. The weight of this realization settled on her shoulders, a burden she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. The following week, Jenna's persistence finally yielded results. During a quiet moment in the staff room, she struck up a conversation with Dr. Patel, one of the hospital's young residents who had been working closely with Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris? Yeah, he's been a great mentor, Dr. Patel said, sipping his coffee. But there's always been this sadness about him, you know? Jenna nodded encouragingly, sensing she was on the verge of a breakthrough. I've noticed that too. Do you know why? Dr. Patel hesitated, lowering his voice. Well, it's not exactly common knowledge, but I heard from one of the senior nurses that Dr. Harris lost his daughter a few years ago. Terrible car accident. She was about Mia's age, I think. The revelation hit Jenna like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, Dr. Harris's behavior, his deep connection with Mia, everything made sense. The guilt she had been feeling for doubting his intentions washed over her in a wave. As she left the staff room, Jenna's mind raced. Dr. Harris wasn't acting out of some nefarious motive. He was channeling his grief into helping a child who reminded him of his lost daughter. His nightly visits, the stories, the extra attention, it was all part of his healing process, and in turn, it was helping Mia. Determined to make amends for her suspicions, Jenna decided to support Dr. Harris's efforts to help Mia. The next day, she arrived at the hospital with a bag full of children's books and small toys. These are for Mia, she told the surprised nurse at the reception. I thought they might cheer her up. Over the next few days, Jenna made a point of spending extra time in Mia's room, reading to her and playing simple games. She noticed Dr. Harris watching her once, a look of gratitude in his eyes. One afternoon, as Jenna was adjusting Mia's IV, the little girl spoke up. Nurse Jenna, did you know that Dr. Harris can do magic? Jenna smiled, playing along. Oh, really? What kind of magic? Mia's eyes lit up. He makes the pain go away with his stories, and sometimes, when he holds my hand, I feel all warm and tingly, like the medicine is working better. The innocent statement touched Jenna deeply. She realized that the connection between Dr. Harris and Mia was more than just a doctor comforting a patient. It was a symbiotic relationship, each healing the other in ways they probably didn't even realize. As the days passed, Jenna noticed a marked improvement in Mia's condition. Her blood tests were showing better results, and her spirits remained high. The other nurses commented on the change, attributing it to the new treatment protocol. But Jenna knew better. She had witnessed firsthand the power of compassion and human connection. During one of her night shifts, Jenna encountered Dr. Harris in the corridor outside Mia's room. For a moment, they stood in awkward silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Jenna spoke. Dr. Harris, I know about your daughter. I'm so sorry for your loss. Dr. Harris's face tightened for a moment, then softened. Thank you, Jenna. I appreciate your discretion in this matter. Of course, Jenna nodded. And I want you to know that I think what you're doing for Mia is wonderful. If there's anything I can do to help. A ghost of a smile crossed Dr. Harris's face. Actually, there is. Mia mentioned she enjoys your visits. Perhaps we could work together to make her stay here a little more bearable. As they discussed ways to brighten Mia's days, Jenna felt a sense of purpose wash over her. She had started this journey suspecting wrongdoing, but instead had discovered a profound lesson in healing and humanity. However, as she watched Dr. Harris walk away, a nagging feeling persisted in the back of her mind. Despite the explanation for his behavior, she couldn't shake the sense that there was still more to uncover. The mystery surrounding Dr. Harris might have been partially solved, but Jenna's instincts told her that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. As Mia's treatment progressed, Jenna noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the pediatric oncology ward. The young girl's resilience and Dr. Harris's dedication seemed to have a ripple effect, touching everyone around them. One afternoon, during a routine checkup, Mia surprised both Jenna and Dr. Harris with an unexpected request. "Dr. Harris," she said, her voice small but determined, "I was thinking, could I maybe help other kids here, like you helped me?" Dr. Harris exchanged a glance with Jenna, his eyes bright with emotion. "What did you have in mind, Mia?" The little girl's face lit up. "Well, your stories always make me feel better. Maybe I could tell stories to the other kids, or we could have a big story time for everyone?" Jenna watched as something transformed in Dr. Harris's expression. The perpetual shadow of grief that had haunted his features seemed to lift, replaced by a spark of purpose. "That's a wonderful idea, Mia," he said, his voice warm with pride. "What do you think, Nurse Jenna? Could we organize something like that?" Jenna felt a surge of excitement. "Absolutely. We could plan a storytelling event for all the children in the ward. It would be great for morale." Over the next few days, Jenna and Dr. Harris worked together to plan the event. They coordinated with other staff members, arranged for appropriate decorations, and even reached out to some local volunteers who could help with costumes and props. As they collaborated, Jenna observed Dr. Harris closely. The change in him was palpable. He seemed more energized, more present. It was as if Mia's simple wish had awakened something in him, giving him a new sense of purpose beyond his medical duties. During one of their planning sessions, Dr. Harris opened up to Jenna. "You know, after I lost Sarah, my daughter, I thought I'd never find joy in my work again. But Mia, she's shown me that there's still so much good I can do." Jenna felt honored by his confidence. "You've made a real difference in her life, Dr. Harris, and now you're going to touch the lives of so many more children." As the day of the event approached, excitement buzzed through the pediatric ward. Children who were well enough eagerly helped with preparations, making simple decorations and practicing their own stories to share. The morning of the storytelling party arrived, and the hospital seemed transformed. Colorful streamers adorned the corridors, and the sound of laughter echoed through usually quiet halls. Mia, wearing a glittery tiara, courtesy of the volunteers, was the star of the show. Jenna watched in awe as the little girl, who had been so ill just weeks ago, stood before a group of her peers and began to tell her story. It was a tale of a brave princess who fought a dragon made of shadows, a thinly veiled metaphor for her own battle with cancer. As Mia spoke, Jenna glanced around the room. The other children were captivated, their own pain and fear momentarily forgotten. Parents and staff members wiped away tears, moved by the young girl's courage and imagination. Dr. Harris stood at the back of the room, his face a mixture of pride and something else, a bittersweet joy that spoke of healing and new beginnings. For a moment, Jenna could almost see the ghost of his daughter standing beside him, smiling at the scene before them. The event was an unqualified success. In its aftermath, Jenna noticed a change in the overall mood of the ward. There was more laughter, more hope. Patients seemed more engaged in their treatments, and staff morale had noticeably improved. However, as she observed Dr. Harris in the days following the event, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. While he seemed more animated and engaged with his patients, there were moments when a distant look would cross his face, as if he were grappling with something unseen. One evening, as Jenna was finishing her rounds, she overheard Dr. Harris on the phone in his office. His voice was low and urgent, the words indistinct, but the tone unmistakably troubled. As she passed by, she caught a glimpse of his face, the joy of recent days replaced by a look of deep concern. Jenna hesitated, her hand poised to knock on the door. But something held her back. Whatever Dr. Harris was dealing with, it was clear that the story was far from over. As she walked away, Jenna couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the precipice of something bigger, something that had the potential to change everything they thought they knew about healing, hope, and the power of human connection. The day of the storytelling party dawned bright and full of promise. The pediatric ward, usually a place of hushed voices and worried faces, buzzed with an energy that felt almost magical. Jenna arrived early, her arms full of the last-minute decorations and her heart full of anticipation. As she hung colorful streamers and arranged chairs, Jenna couldn't help but marvel at the transformation, not just of the physical space, but of the people within it. Children who had been listless and withdrawn now chatted excitedly, their eyes bright with anticipation. Parents who had worn worry like a second skin now smiled, if tentatively, at the prospect of a day filled with joy rather than fear. Dr. Harris arrived shortly after, carrying a large box of books and props. His face, usually etched with lines of concern, now bore a smile that reached his eyes. "Ready for the big day, Nurse Jenna?" he asked, his voice light. "As ready as we'll ever be," Jenna replied, returning his smile. She couldn't help but notice how different he looked, more alive, more present than she had ever seen him. As the morning progressed, the ward filled with laughter and chatter. Volunteers arrived, dressed as storybook characters, much to the delight of the young patients. Mia, resplendent in her glittery tiara, held court in the center of it all, her excitement palpable. When it was time for Mia to tell her story, a hush fell over the room. Jenna held her breath as the little girl, who had faced so much, stood before her peers and began to speak. Her voice, though small, carried clearly through the room as she wove her tale of the brave princess and the shadow dragon. As Mia spoke, Jenna's gaze wandered around the room. She saw children leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word. She saw parents with tears in their eyes, perhaps seeing their own children's struggles reflected in Mia's story. And she saw the hospital staff, many of whom had come in on their day off to attend, their faces a mixture of pride and wonder. But it was Dr. Harris who caught and held Jenna's attention. He stood at the back of the room, his posture relaxed yet alert. As Mia's story reached its climax, the princess facing down the shadow dragon with nothing but her courage and a magical amulet, Jenna saw something flicker across Dr. Harris's face. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw a shadow of pain, quickly replaced by a look of fierce pride. The story ended to enthusiastic applause, and the party continued with games, more stories, and a special lunch for all the patients. The day was an unqualified success, bringing light and laughter to a place that often saw too little of either. As the event wound down and patients returned to their rooms, exhausted but happy, Jenna found herself helping Dr. Harris clean up. They worked in companionable silence for a while, both lost in thought. "You know," Dr. Harris said suddenly, his voice soft, "I haven't felt this alive in years. Seeing Mia up there, seeing all these kids laughing and just being kids, it's reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place." Jenna nodded, understanding. "It's been amazing to see the change in everyone, especially you, Dr. Harris." He smiled, but Jenna noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, well, it's been a journey." As they finished tidying up, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Dr. Harris's story than she knew. The flicker of pain she had seen during Mia's story, the moments when he seemed to retreat into himself, they hinted at depths she had yet to plumb. Later that evening, As Jenna made her final rounds, she paused outside Mia's room. The little girl was fast asleep, a small smile on her face, the glittery tiara still perched on her head. As Jenna turned to go, she saw Dr. Harris standing at the end of the corridor, his gaze fixed on Mia's room, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Jenna was tempted to approach him, to ask about the shadows she had seen in his eyes. But something held her back. Whatever Dr. Harris was grappling with, it was clear that the story was far from over. As she watched him turn and walk away, his shoulders slightly hunched, Jenna couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the edge of something bigger, a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. In the days following the storytelling event, a noticeable shift occurred in the pediatric ward. The lingering positivity seemed to buoy both patients and staff, creating a more hopeful atmosphere. However, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss with Dr. Harris. One evening, as the hospital settled into its night routine, Jenna found Dr. Harris alone in the staff lounge. He sat hunched over a cup of coffee, his usual energy replaced by a palpable weariness. Sensing an opportunity, Jenna decided to approach him. "Dr. Harris?" she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Is everything all right?" He looked up, surprised, then gestured for her to join him. "Jenna, please, sit down." As she took a seat across from him, Jenna noticed the deep lines etched on his face, the shadows under his eyes. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Dr. Harris spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know about Sarah, my daughter?" It wasn't a question. Jenna nodded, encouraging him to continue. "What you don't know," he continued, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup, "is that I was driving the car when the accident happened. It was raining, the roads were slick. I lost control for just a second." The revelation hit Jenna like a physical blow. Suddenly, so many things about Dr. Harris made sense. His dedication to his patients, his special connection with Mia, the pain that sometimes flashed across his face. "Dr. Harris, I'm so sorry," Jenna said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine what you've been through." He looked up at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "For years, I've carried this guilt. I threw myself into my work, thinking if I could save other children, somehow it would make up for Sarah." His voice broke on his daughter's name. Jenna reached across the table, gently placing her hand on his. "You've helped so many children, Dr. Harris. What happened was a tragic accident, but look at the good you've done since then." Dr. Harris smiled sadly. "Mia, she reminds me so much of Sarah. Her spirit, her courage. When I'm with her, telling her stories, for a moment I can almost pretend—" He trailed off, and Jenna felt her heart ache for him. "Is that why you visit her at night? To tell her stories?" He nodded. "It helps her sleep, helps with the pain. And selfishly, it helps me too. But lately, I've been wondering if I'm too attached, if I'm crossing a line." Jenna considered her words carefully. "I think what you're doing for Mia is beautiful. You're giving her hope, making her treatment bearable. But Dr. Harris, have you ever considered talking to someone about Sarah? About the accident?" For a moment, Dr. Harris was silent, his gaze distant. Then he turned to Jenna, a look of vulnerability on his face that she had never seen before. "I've never really talked about it with anyone. I'm not sure I know how." Jenna squeezed his hand gently. "It's never too late to start healing, Dr. Harris. And you don't have to do it alone." As they continued to talk, Jenna found herself opening up as well. She shared her own struggles, the patients she had lost, the times she had questioned her career choice, the emotional toll of working in pediatric oncology. Their conversation stretched into the night, two colleagues finding common ground in their shared experiences of grief, hope, and the challenging journey of healing. As they talked, Jenna felt a deeper connection forming between them, based on mutual understanding and respect. When they finally parted ways in the early hours of the morning, something had shifted. Dr. Harris stood a little straighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and Jenna felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to support not just her patients, but her colleagues as well. As she walked to her car, the sky just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn, Jenna couldn't help but feel that this conversation was a turning point. But even as she felt hope for Dr. Harris's healing, a nagging feeling persisted. There was still something unresolved, something lurking beneath the surface. The mystery surrounding Dr. Harris and Mia was far from over, and Jenna had a feeling that the biggest revelations were yet to come. The weeks following Jenna and Dr. Harris's heart-to-heart conversation brought a series of positive developments. Mia's condition continued to improve, her latest round of tests showing promising results. The atmosphere in the pediatric ward remained uplifted, with the storytelling event having sparked a series of similar activities that kept spirits high. One particularly sunny morning, Jenna arrived at the hospital to find an unusual buzz of excitement. As she approached Mia's room, she saw Dr. Harris emerging, a broad smile on his face. "Jenna," he called out, his voice filled with barely contained joy. "We've got great news. Mia's latest results are better than we could have hoped for. If this trend continues, she might be able to go home in a few weeks." The news hit Jenna like a wave of warmth. "That's incredible, Dr. Harris. Have you told her yet?" He nodded, his eyes bright. "I just did. You should see her. She's over the moon. But," he paused, a flicker of something crossing his face, "she's also a bit nervous about leaving. This place has been her home for so long." Jenna understood. For children like Mia, the hospital became a second home, the staff a second family. "We'll make sure she's prepared," Jenna assured him, "and she knows she'll have follow-up appointments, so it's not goodbye forever." As they discussed plans for Mia's potential discharge, Jenna couldn't help but notice the change in Dr. Harris. He seemed lighter, more at peace. Their late-night conversation had clearly been a turning point for him. Later that day, as Jenna was checking Mia's vitals, the little girl looked up at her with wide eyes. "Nurse Jenna, do you think I'll still be able to tell stories to the other kids when I go home?" Jenna smiled, touched by Mia's concern for her fellow patients. "Of course you can, sweetie. We can arrange for you to visit during activity times. And who knows, maybe you can write down your stories and we can read them to the other children." Mia's face lit up at the idea. "Oh, can Dr. Harris help me write them down? He's really good at stories." "I'm sure he'd love to," Jenna replied, making a mental note to suggest the idea to Dr. Harris. It seemed like the perfect project to help them both transition to Mia's life outside the hospital. As the day progressed, Jenna and Dr. Harris found themselves working closely together, planning not just for Mia's discharge but for a small celebration to mark the occasion. They decided to organize another storytelling session, this time with Mia as the guest of honor, sharing her story of recovery. "You know," Dr. Harris said as they finalized the plans, "I've been thinking about what you said, about talking to someone about Sarah. I've made an appointment with a therapist." Jenna felt a surge of pride and affection for her colleague. "That's wonderful, Dr. Harris. It's a big step." He nodded, a mix of determination and apprehension on his face. "It's time. Seeing Mia recover, it's made me realize that healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds." As they continued to work, discussing ideas for future events and programs for the pediatric ward, Jenna felt a sense of optimism she hadn't experienced in years. It seemed that Mia's journey had sparked a chain reaction of healing, touching everyone around her. However, just as everything seemed to be falling into place, an unexpected event shattered the calm. That night, as Jenna was doing her final rounds, she heard a commotion coming from Mia's room. Rushing in, she found the little girl tossing in her sleep, clearly in the grip of a nightmare. "No, no," Mia mumbled, her face contorted in fear. "The Shadow Man. He's coming back." Jenna quickly moved to wake her, gently shaking her shoulder. "Mia, sweetheart, wake up. It's just a dream." Mia's eyes flew open, filled with terror. She clung to Jenna, shaking. "He was here, Nurse Jenna. The Shadow Man. He said he's not finished with me yet." As Jenna held the trembling child, trying to comfort her, a chill ran down her spine. Something about Mia's words, the intensity of her fear, felt all too real. And as she looked up, she saw Dr. Harris standing in the doorway, his face pale, a look of shock and recognition in his eyes. In that moment, Jenna realized that their journey was far from over. The mystery that had been lurking beneath the surface was about to come to light, and she had a feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The following days were marked by a tense atmosphere that permeated the pediatric ward. Mia's nightmare had shaken everyone, especially Dr. Harris, whose demeanor had shifted dramatically. Jenna observed him closely, noting the return of his troubled expression and distracted manner. Determined to get to the bottom of the situation, Jenna decided to delve deeper into the hospital's records. She started by reviewing the files of Dr. Harris's previous patients, looking for any patterns or anomalies that might shed light on Mia's disturbing dream. As she pored over the records late one night, a name caught her eye: Emily Winters. The file showed that Emily had been a patient of Dr. Harris's 2 years ago, also suffering from leukemia. What struck Jenna was a note in the margin of Emily's file, written in Dr. Harris's distinctive handwriting: "Recurring nightmares, shadow figure." Jenna's heart raced as she dug further. She found 2 more cases with similar notations, all patients of Dr. Harris, all children battling serious illnesses. Each file mentioned nightmares or hallucinations involving a shadowy presence. The next morning, Jenna approached Dr. Harris as he was reviewing charts at the nurse's station. "Dr. Harris, can we talk privately for a moment?" she asked, keeping her voice low. He looked up, surprise and a flicker of something else, fear, crossing his face. "Of course, Jenna. Let's use my office." Once inside, Jenna took a deep breath before speaking. "Dr. Harris, I've been reviewing some old patient files, and I've noticed something concerning." She explained what she had found, watching his face carefully as she spoke. Dr. Harris listened, his expression growing more troubled with each word. When Jenna finished, he sat heavily in his chair, running a hand over his face. "I was hoping it was just a coincidence," he muttered, almost to himself. "What do you mean?" Jenna pressed, her concern growing. Dr. Harris looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Jenna, what I'm about to tell you might sound crazy, but I swear it's true. These nightmares, this Shadow Man, I've seen him too." Jenna felt a chill run down her spine. "What?" "It started after Sarah died," Dr. Harris continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "At first, I thought it was just grief, my mind playing tricks on me. But then I started noticing patterns. Children who were very ill, who were close to death. They would have these nightmares. See this figure." As Dr. Harris spoke, Jenna's mind raced. This was far beyond anything she had imagined. "But what does it mean? Who is this Shadow Man?" Dr. Harris shook his head. "I don't know. But I've been trying to protect these children, to keep him away somehow. That's why I spend so much time with them, telling stories, trying to keep their spirits up. I thought if I could help them get better, he'd stay away." The implications of what Dr. Harris was saying were staggering. Jenna struggled to process it all. "Dr. Harris, I don't even know what to say." Have you told anyone else about this?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Who would believe me? I'm a man of science, Jenna. I deal in facts, in things I can see and measure. This defies everything I know." As they continued to talk, piecing together the fragments of this bizarre puzzle, a commotion outside interrupted them. They rushed out to find a flurry of activity around Mia's room. "What's happening?" Jenna asked a passing nurse. "It's Mia," the nurse replied, her face pale. "She's had some kind of seizure. They're running tests now." Jenna and Dr. Harris exchanged a look of horror. As they hurried towards Mia's room, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something much bigger and more terrifying than they had ever imagined. The mystery of the Shadow Man, the connection to Dr. Harris's past, and now Mia's sudden decline, it all seemed to be converging into a perfect storm. And as Jenna watched Dr. Harris rush to Mia's bedside, his face a mask of determination and fear, she knew that the final act of this strange and unsettling drama was about to unfold. The following hours were a blur of activity as the medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize Mia. Jenna found herself torn between assisting with Mia's care and processing the shocking revelations from Dr. Harris. As the night wore on, Mia's condition finally stabilized, but the tension in the air remained palpable. In the early hours of the morning, Jenna found Dr. Harris slumped in a chair outside Mia's room, his face etched with exhaustion and worry. She approached him cautiously, aware of the weight of their shared secret. "Dr. Harris," she said softly, "we need to talk about what's happening, about the Shadow Man." He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "Jenna, I don't know what to do. I've tried for years to protect these children, to keep him away. But now..." Jenna sat beside him, her voice low but urgent. "We need to tell someone. The hospital administration, maybe even the police. This is bigger than us." Dr. Harris shook his head vehemently. "No, you don't understand. If we tell anyone, they'll think I'm crazy. They'll take me off Mia's case, off all my cases. I can't let that happen. These children need me." As they debated, a nurse approached them. "Dr. Harris, Nurse Jenna, the hospital administrator wants to see you both immediately." Exchanging worried glances, they made their way to the administrator's office. As they entered, they found not only the administrator, but also two stern-looking individuals in suits. "Dr. Harris, Nurse Jenna," the administrator began, his voice grave. "These gentlemen are from the hospital's ethics committee. Some concerns have been raised about Dr. Harris's conduct, particularly regarding his interactions with young patients." Jenna felt her heart drop. How had they found out? Who had reported Dr. Harris? One of the men in suits spoke up. "We've received reports of inappropriate behavior, including unauthorized nighttime visits to patients' rooms. We're also concerned about some unusual notations in patient files." Dr. Harris paled visibly. "I can explain," he began, but the man cut him off. "Dr. Harris, pending a full investigation, you are suspended from all patient care duties. We'll need you to surrender your hospital ID and leave the premises immediately." Jenna watched in horror as Dr. Harris seemed to crumble before her eyes. "No, you don't understand," he pleaded. "These children need me. I'm protecting them." The administrator's face softened slightly. "Robert, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Go home. Cooperate with the investigation. We'll sort this out." As Dr. Harris was escorted from the office, Jenna felt torn between her loyalty to her colleague and her duty to the hospital. She knew the truth about why Dr. Harris had been visiting patients at night, about the Shadow Man. But how could she explain it without sounding as crazy as they now thought Dr. Harris was? Over the next few days, the hospital buzzed with rumors and speculation. Jenna found herself under scrutiny as well, questioned about her knowledge of Dr. Harris's activities. She struggled to balance her desire to protect Dr. Harris with her concern for Mia and the other patients. Mia, still recovering from her seizure, asked repeatedly for Dr. Harris. "Where is he, Nurse Jenna?" she would ask, her eyes wide with fear. "He keeps the shadow man away. I need him." Jenna did her best to comfort Mia, all while grappling with her own fears and doubts. Was she doing the right thing by keeping quiet about what she knew? Or was she putting Mia and the other children at risk? As the investigation into Dr. Harris deepened, Jenna found herself at a crossroads. She held information that could potentially exonerate Dr. Harris, but sharing it might mean risking her own career and credibility. The Shadow Man, the nightmares, Dr. Harris's tragic past, it all seemed too fantastical to be believed. Yet, as she watched Mia's condition begin to deteriorate again in Dr. Harris's absence, Jenna knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. Something had to be done, not just for Dr. Harris, but for all the children who might be at risk. With a heavy heart and a determined spirit, Jenna made a decision. She would find a way to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As she walked down the hospital corridor, steeling herself for what was to come, she had no idea that the biggest shock of all was yet to reveal itself. The tension in Springfield Central Hospital reached a fever pitch as Jenna grappled with her decision. She knew she had to act, but the weight of the potential consequences bore heavily on her mind. As she made her nightly rounds, a sense of foreboding hung in the air, thick and oppressive. It was just past midnight when Jenna's world turned upside down. She was checking on a patient 2 doors down from Mia's room when she heard a muffled scream. Her heart racing, she sprinted towards Mia's room, only to find it empty, the bed sheets rumpled and thrown aside. "Mia!" Jenna called out, panic rising in her throat. She rushed to the nurse's station, triggering the hospital's missing patient protocol. Within minutes, the quiet night erupted into chaos as staff members and security guards began a frantic search. Hours passed with no sign of Mia. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the hospital grounds, Jenna found herself being questioned by police officers and hospital administrators. She recounted the events of the night, careful to omit any mention of the Shadow Man or her conversations with Dr. Harris. Just as hope began to fade, a young orderly burst into the room. "We found her!" he exclaimed, breathless. "Mia's in the old storage room in the basement. She's asking for Dr. Harris." Jenna's relief was short-lived as she followed the stream of medical personnel rushing to the basement. When they reached the storage room, they found Mia huddled in a corner, clutching something to her chest. "Mia, sweetheart," Jenna said softly, approaching the girl. "What happened? Are you okay?" Mia looked up, her eyes wide and filled with an emotion Jenna couldn't quite place. Fear. Excitement. "I saw him again, Nurse Jenna, the Shadow Man. But this time I followed him." A hush fell over the room as Mia continued, her voice trembling. "He led me here. He wanted me to find this." She held out what she had been clutching, an old, leather-bound journal. As Jenna took the journal, she felt a chill run down her spine. The name embossed on the cover made her breath catch in her throat. Dr. Robert Harris, Sr. With shaking hands, Jenna opened the journal. As she skimmed its pages, her eyes widened in disbelief. The journal contained detailed accounts of a long-running scheme of fraudulent donations and experimental treatments, dating back decades. Names of high-ranking hospital officials, including some still in power, were implicated in the cover-up. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The Shadow Man wasn't a supernatural entity. It was a metaphor, a manifestation of the guilt and secrets that had plagued the hospital for years. Dr. Harris hadn't been trying to protect the children from a mystical threat. He had been trying to shield them from the very real danger of being used as unwitting test subjects in unethical trials. As the implications of the discovery sank in, the room erupted into chaos once more. Hospital administrators who had arrived on the scene began making frantic phone calls, while others tried to confiscate the journal. In the midst of the commotion, Jenna locked eyes with Mia. The little girl nodded solemnly, a wisdom beyond her years reflected in her gaze. At that moment, Jenna understood that Mia had known more than she let on all along. Her dreams and visions had been her subconscious mind's way of processing the wrongdoings she had unknowingly witnessed. Over the next few days, the truth came to light. Dr. Harris was cleared of all charges and reinstated. It was revealed that he had been conducting his own investigation into the hospital's dark past, using his nighttime visits to protect vulnerable patients from being enrolled in unauthorized trials. The scandal rocked the medical community, leading to a series of high-profile arrests and a complete overhaul of the hospital's administration. Dr. Harris emerged as a whistleblower and hero, his dedication to his patients finally understood and appreciated. As for Mia, her recovery took on a new significance. She became a symbol of resilience and truth, her story inspiring other patients and their families to come forward with their own experiences. Jenna, standing by Mia's bedside on the day of her discharge, felt a profound sense of closure. The mystery that had consumed her for months had been solved, but more importantly, justice had been served. As Mia hugged her goodbye, the little girl whispered, "The shadows are gone now, Nurse Jenna. We made them go away." Watching Mia leave the hospital hand in hand with her parents, Jenna realized that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from medicine, but from the courage to face the truth and the strength to stand up for what's right. The shadows that had haunted Springfield Central Hospital had finally been banished, replaced by the light of truth and the promise of a better future.